You're watching Newsfeed AM. Let's begin with this. Today marks exactly a month since Hamas launched an attack on Israel, killing over 1,400 people. In response, Israel has carried out widespread bombardment in the Gaza Strip, killing more than 10,000 Palestinians, mostly civilians. Israel's indiscriminate bombardment have caused widespread condemnation with calls for a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause. Israel is, however, defiant, vowing to continue the onslaught until it has completely destroyed Hamas. Joining me now is the National Director at the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, Wendy Kahn. Wendy, good morning to you and thank you for your time. So today, marking exactly the first anniversary of that October 7 attack. However, things have quickly moved and there is widespread condemnation for what Israel is conducting in Gaza, and a number of officials, including the government here in South Africa, not mincing their words that what is going on is a genocide. How do you see it?
Holly, I have deep sympathy and distress in terms of all of the people that have died and all of the people that are suffering, be they in Israel, be they in Gaza, be they in Palestine. It is horrific what is going on. But I think that what is really upsetting is that in the days, and actually the week, after 1,400 Israelis were brutally murdered, and we are talking really torture, cruelty, cutting babies out of mothers' stomachs, burning babies in an oven. Really, we've got charred bodies of mothers and babies that were tied together and burnt. 260 people systematically executed at a festival. All of these things, and there was not a peep out of Durko. There was not a peep out of our president. There was not a peep out of anybody in this government to turn around and regret that loss of life. We should always regret loss of life. But it took one full week before anybody could do that. To this day, there has not been a call to the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador. There has not been a call to the government of Israel to express any sympathy. There has not even been a call to the families of the 2 South Africans that were murdered on that day. Their families are, can you imagine, it was an elderly granny who'd gone to see her baby in the south of Israel. She was murdered by Hamas. And our government has not even reached out yet to her family. We should show compassion and horror. But what happened on that day, that our government couldn't come out unequivocally, immediately, as they have for every other aspect of this conflict, I think tells volumes.
Reaction?
Just to mention, in all of these communications, and even when you started today, you didn't mention the 240 hostages that Hamas abducted from their homes in the south of Israel, on the kibbutzim, in the south of Israel. They took them into Gaza. We're talking young babies. There's a baby of 9 months old. There are toddlers. There are elderly people. There are women. They're civilians. I know that Hamas, when they spoke on SABC last week, they tried to demonize them as they were soldiers, they're prisoners, and our government is using exactly the same rhetoric now in the statement that came out over the weekend. Durko used exactly the same terminology as Hamas.
Wendy, I have to tell you that as a news station, we absolutely are bound by the rules. And that means that we have to be fair in our reporting.
Right.
Just because the more than 200 hostages were not mentioned in that introduction, you've heard how long it was already. But we have been mentioning hostages in Israel. But
it's a seminal point, Holly. It's a seminal point, the hostages, because everybody now wants, we want peace. We want a resolution. We want this fighting to stop. We want a ceasefire. But how can that happen when Hamas is holding hostages, civilian hostages? That is an impediment to any peace building.
So explain this then. How does Israel plan to get those hostages out if the bombardment, indiscriminate bombardment, continues? Don't you think that those hostages stand to be killed as well.
Hamas has made it very clear. They have made it very, very clear. They are not giving those hostages back. And I think what a pity for our government, who has got such a close relationship with Hamas, to the extent that our Minister of International Relations phoned him to express support just after that massacre. Why couldn't that relationship be used to get these hostages out so that we could move forward in terms of peace building?
Let me ask this question. You have suggested, and I hope you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, you've suggested that South Africa, the South African government, has not been in touch with the Israeli ambassador who is here in South Africa since this war started.
Yes.
If not, why do you think that is?
I think the question is asked. The question is asked because they have completely sided, not even with the Palestinians, they have completely sided with Hamas. And Hamas has congratulated the South African government. They, in the broadcast last week on SABC with a Hamas spokesperson, he thanked South African government for the stance that they're taking and the close relationship that they had. He then went on to issue a statement on social media today to thank the South African government for bringing back their diplomats and for sanctioning the Israeli ambassador. They've taken a one-sided stance.
Let me ask you this question. And the South African government is very clear, by the way, that they are decidedly non-aligned in this particular conflict because of South Africa's history of apartheid. We're going to talk about that in a moment, but I want to understand from you why it is that the attacks in Gaza, the Israeli government says the attacks are not against the people of Palestine. They are targeted at Hamas. However, you cannot say that with a straight face because the people who are affected on the ground are ordinary civilians. You've just retold a gut-wrenching story of a mother whose stomach was cut because she was pregnant, babies put in the oven. In Gaza, the situation is just as terrible because children that have died there, the suggestion is that the amount of children, the number of children that have died in this war probably has not been seen in 30 years. Surely that cannot be something that you, perhaps, if you're a mother, can live with. Is that something that Israel is willing to justify?
I can't talk on behalf of Israel. I'm a South African citizen. I can say that I started this interview expressing my deep, deep sympathy for every single person who has suffered in this conflict. What I am asking my government is why have you not sat down with Hamas and urged them to release those hostages and so that a ceasefire is more possible. That is an impediment. It is a definite impediment to peace building. And what I would hope that my government, instead of just having discussions and cozy conversations with Hamas, that they would use those relationships to take the peace process forward by releasing those hostages.
As things stand, Wendy, the situation in Gaza is worsening, and there is a characterization of what is going on there right now as a genocide and even a Holocaust. And this is something that the Jewish state would be well aware of. Is that something that you, as the Jewish community in South Africa, are prepared to live with?
I am not going to use words like Holocaust, and I'm not going to use words like genocide. Those are things that are very, very specific, and I don't think that we need to import simplistic kinds of... I could have used the words genocide when I described 7 October.
I don't think simplistic would be an appropriate word.
I think we could have...
How do you describe...
I think we could have used that word when they went in and they systematically mowed down 260 people at a concert. I think that could have been a term used genocide, but we never used that because it's not necessary. We can see that this is a terrible situation and we can express our sympathy and our condemnation. We don't have to use words like Holocaust.
At the moment, there is pressure for Israel to press a pause button.
Yeah.
And that is actually a very light way of saying ceasefire. Because Israel is determined that there is not going to
get their civilians back.
A ceasefire.
Yeah, while their civilians are being held in Gaza, they can't proceed with a ceasefire. I can't speak on the terms of the Israeli government, but all I can say is that if, God forbid, 240 South Africans were taken by ISIS into Mozambique, I would like to think that my government would do everything in their power to come and fetch them.
What will it take to bring these warring parties to a table?
Well, it's such a pity, because I think somebody who had the ear of both parties is somebody that could try and bring that about. And South Africa could have played that role. We've got such a history of negotiation and dialogue, but they've chosen not to. They've chosen not to reach out at all to the Israelis when they were in their hour of need, and they've made it very clear that they are siding with Hamas. And it's pity, it's a real pity that they haven't put the needs of these people above that kind of one-sided approach.
Let me say this.
Because it doesn't achieve anything.
Let me say this, and I don't pretend for one moment to be speaking on behalf of the South African government, but what they have said on record is that they do not have a relationship with Hamas. The South African government has a long-standing relationship with the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
I think you have to acknowledge that is not the reality on the ground. That conversation, and incidentally, we have launched a PIA application for that telephone call between Naledi Pandor and Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas. We would like to know what was said on that conversation. On the Hamas website, they made it very clear that she had supported the incursion into Israel and the murder that day, that massacre that happened on the 7th of October. Naledi Pandor, the minister, she has said something very different. She said that she'd phoned them to express support for humanitarian aid. Well, we would like to see that conversation.
As we taper down this interview, let's discuss the current situation right now. South Africa deciding to withdraw its diplomats from Tel Aviv, and the governing ANC, they are not mincing their words, that up until there is a ceasefire in Israel, the Israeli ambassador to South Africa must leave the country. How do you respond to that, or what's your comment?
Well, I'm a little bit shocked that in Israel we have civilians. We have Jewish civilians, we have Christian civilians, South African civilians who are in Israel at the moment. Our own people, our citizens who are there. And they are withdrawing their diplomatic staff, not just an ambassador, not just withdrawing an ambassador to come here for a consultation, as they call it. They're withdrawing their staff during a war. And I'm asking, is that not letting down the people of South Africa?
The South African government position is that the withdrawals are for consultation.
For consultation. Can you not do consultation on a Zoom so that you can be there supporting South African citizens who are in that region?
So what's your interpretation of the withdrawal?
It's a political game. They don't have an ambassador there to withdraw anymore, so they're withdrawing their junior diplomatic staff. And I'm saying I think that is irresponsible at a time like this, that South African citizens in Israel have not got diplomatic support.
As we conclude the conversation, there is much talk. In fact, even the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, he has been in the Middle East, in the middle of this conflict, and he has expressed his feelings on what he has seen, but there does seem to be, I suppose, a wait-and-see approach as to whether or not crimes against humanity can be brought against the state of Israel.
And against Hamas, maybe.
If that happens...
Hamas took their own footage. Right now, there is a viewing of Hamas footage in Johannesburg. It might be a good idea for you to go and seize that footage. They took their own footage of the atrocities and the torture that they perpetrated on Israeli citizens. It might be a good idea to view some of that.
The element about apartheid Israel, because that's what the South African officials constantly refer to when they talk about the Jewish state in Israel. Why do you think they call the Jewish state apartheid Israel? Why is there such a characterization of Israel against the Palestinian people?
I don't find any need to label. I disagree with it. We can have a long conversation in terms of the apartheid label. I don't think it's useful. I think what's going on now is incredibly painful in Israel, and I wish that my government, instead of posturing and using labels...
It cannot not be useful,
instead
Wendy. Let me challenge you a little bit. It cannot not be useful to get into that conversation, because it is what has precipitated this, because that's why organizations such as Hamas exist now, because they exist under the label that says they are a resistance movement against an apartheid state of Israel that is occupying territories in Palestine.
Terror organizations exist all over the world. They exist in Africa. Boko Haram is existing in the northern part of our continent. Are they also resisting apartheid? Are you also giving them freedom?
If there wasn't apartheid...
ISIS? Are you agreeing with ISIS?
Wendy, we're talking about the situation.
These are all terror organizations.
Between Israel and Gaza. And I'm saying to you, we probably would not be having this conversation had it not been for the territories in Palestine that are occupied by people that are labeled as Israeli settlers. There are checkpoints where Palestinians cannot go. And you can't argue that the people of Israel, or rather people of Palestine, have not been subjected to subhuman conditions.
I think that now more than ever, Israel has got to protect its citizens. After what happened on the 7th of October, they have a responsibility. And I think that they have got a responsibility to have borders. We want a two-state solution. The South African Jewish Board of Deputies has always
really want a two-state solution?
We have always... I'm not a representative of the Israeli government, as I said to you. I am talking on behalf of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. We have always called for a two-state solution. Israel and Palestine living side by side with secure borders. Israel has a right to defend its civilians. And what happened on the 7th of October is an example of when Hamas came in and what they did to Israeli citizens. Israel cannot not support their citizens and their civilians. And they cannot ignore the fact that 240 of their civilians are currently in Gaza. And the South African government is putting absolutely no pressure. That's fine. Leave them there. They don't see how that is stopping any form of peace building and move towards a ceasefire.
I'll tell you what the United Nations Secretary General has had to say. He first acknowledged that what happened on the 7th is something that they absolutely cannot agree with.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's really good to hear.
But also importantly, that collective punishment of the people of Palestine for what Hamas has done, that is also equally unacceptable.
And is it unacceptable that Hamas went in on the 7th of October and launched their citizens, their civilians, into this kind of war? Is that acceptable? Do they have no culpability?
Wendy, we're going to have to leave the conversation there, because this situation, though, I'm sure you'll agree, at some point it's got to come to an end, because war is never a solution.
Absolutely.
The reason South Africa today is a peaceful nation is because people sat around the table like you and I, and conversations got going.
We agree with that, and that's why the pity is that South Africa maintains a solid bias towards Hamas. I'm not even talking about the Palestinian people. A solid bias towards Hamas, when they could have had relationships with Israel and Hamas and be part of actually brokering some kind of peace in that region.
Wendy Kahn, let me thank you very much for your time from the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Still to come, we give you